Hi, George. My name's Matt. You mentioned earlier that you wrote mainly to explore and discover new worlds, and Westeros and the world of Song of Ice and Fire is so rich. So I'm wondering, with what's left in the books, how much of Westeros do we have left to discover, and how much do you write because it's necessary for the story, or do you write mainly because, oh, hey, this is a cool place to tell a story in?
No, the story takes over. The story makes its own demands. There are other parts of Westeros that you will see in the last few books. I mean, I haven't brought the action to Casterly Rock yet. You've never seen Casterly Rock. You've never seen Highgarden. I think both of those locations will play key roles in the books to come. But there is a lot, and I may do when I'm going years ahead now. So who the hell knows what will happen? But the world that I've created there is rich enough to sustain many stories, and the Song of Ice and Fire is only one of those stories. So if I finish these last two books, that will be the end of the story, but not necessarily the end of the world. I think I would probably want to do something else after I finish that, something very different, maybe some short stories, or maybe a science fiction novel or a horror novel I've been thinking of for some time. But eventually, if presuming, of course, I live long enough and keep writing, I might return and tell other stories set in Westeros, in different parts of Westeros, different historical epochs, or different continents and geography. So that might be fun.
Up front.
Hey, George. Big fan of yours. I'm on your right side. So I just wanted to ask you, in terms of writing Renly, a lot of people were taken aback in terms of that one scene that had shown up near the end of the season. And I guess they weren't necessarily picking up on a lot of the subtle hints that you had written in the series. So I was wondering if you had wondered, in terms of what fan reaction would have been at the earlier stages of the series towards writing a more explicit scene like was seen between Renly and the Night of Flowers, and how that might have played out differently if you had written it earlier in the series.
In other words, if I'd had a explicit scene in the books, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I don't know what the reaction would have been. I do like to do certain things, I don't know, subtly. I think subtlety is a virtue. There are things in there that some of my readers pick up on and that other readers miss until it's pointed out to them. One of the things, of course, that's changed in recent decades with the advent of the internet is that readers are sharing their reading experiences. So if there's something there and some readers pick up on it and other readers don't, the readers who missed it soon become aware of it by reading the blogs and bulletin boards and the people who are trotting out their theories and showing all the hints and things like that. So that changes things. But I like to reward the readers who are reading closely and paying attention, because there are a lot of things. I like to write the books to reward rereading. I think the first time you read a book, you're reading for plot. You're reading what happens next. Is the guy going to live or die or something like that? But then if you go back and you reread the book, you may pick up things on a second reading or even a third reading that you missed the first time, and you see, oh my God, look what he's doing here. Look at this piece of foreshadowing, or look at this, he said this, and I didn't notice it the first time, but it's right there, etc. Neither Renly nor Loras is a viewpoint character, and since I'm following a very strict structure of seeing everything through the eyes only of the viewpoint characters, there was really no way to present explicit details of their relationship without having someone like walk in on them when which is sort of I suppose I could have done, but is a clumsy technique. But a television show is is a very different animal, and doesn't have to have the restrictions. The camera is your viewpoint there, and that viewpoint can be pointed anywhere on any character. It doesn't have to necessarily just follow your 6 or 7 designated viewpoint characters.
The major change, of course, is really around perspective, because the books do change perspective, and the show does not as much.
But it's all through. Well, I mean, as a novelist, you have certain tools at your disposal to tell a story with, and these tools are not available to a filmmaker. I mean, as a novelist, you are, you have internal monologue. You can do exposition simply as part of the narrative. You have access to the character's thoughts. You can do unreliable narrators, where you really can't do any of this as a filmmaker or a television director. You're external. You're never inside the character. I mean, yeah, you could try to be. There are those occasional experimental films where you're looking out through someone's eyes and there's a voiceover telling you their thoughts. They're mostly terrible and don't work very well. The voiceover in film is usually a technique that says something really isn't working here, and we're having to patch it over with this clumsy voiceover technique, and is frequently added at a later point, like the famous voiceovers in Blade Runner, which I think really detract from that film and weren't necessary. But you have other techniques that make up for that as a filmmaker or television writer. You have tricks that are not available to novelists. You can bring in music to heighten suspense or to build up the emotional impact of the scene. You can do things with lighting, and of course your actors can bring a tremendous amount to it with just a look, just the expression on their faces. I mean, the scene we showed last night, I referred to in the comments afterwards, where King Robert is arriving in Winterfell, and he hops off his horse and walks up to Ned, and looks at Ned and says, "You've got fat." And Sean Bean just sort of raises his eyes and looks him up and down, and the whole audience howls with laughter because, of course, it's Robert who's really gotten fat. That was something that the two of them did. I doubt it was even in the script. I bet it was, I don't know, some byplay of the actors, but maybe it was in the script. But I certainly could not have done that in prose. I mean, imagine trying to write that in prose, and how would it go? Ned, "You've got fat," Robert said. Ned flicked his eyebrows. Ned raised his head up and down. It doesn't have the same impact as actually seeing Sean Bean's face as he does that little trick. So you have to always be aware of what medium you're working in, and what things will work in it and what things don't work in it.
Hi, George. How difficult do you think it is for a new science fiction or fantasy writer to break into the industry?
It's actually, if you're good, of course, that's always the proviso. You have to have talent. It's pretty easy to break in, actually. I always advise new writers, young writers, to break in with short stories. That was the way I did it in the 70s, and that's still the best way. I mean, we're fortunate that science fiction fantasy still has half a dozen magazines that are looking for new material every month, and therefore have to read their slush pile in a fairly timely manner to find the contents. The established writers, there's not much money in short fiction. You're not going to get rich writing short fiction by any means, and the result is that most established writers don't do very much short fiction past a certain point in their career. They switch to novels, which is where you can actually make a living. So as a result, there's a lot of openings for new talent in the pages of Analog and the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction and Asimov's magazine, and even new e-magazines, things like Lightspeed and Tor.com and so forth. In my mind, a good career path still, as it was in the 70s, is to write a whole bunch of short stories, and sell as many of them as you can, and build a name for yourself in the world of short fiction, because science fiction readers and fantasy readers will notice these stories. And then when you finally do write your first novel, and it hits the stands, it's not just going to be the first novel by some new person that you've never heard of in your life, and why should you pick up their novel when you don't know who they are? It's going to be the long-awaited first novel by this person who's published 20 short stories, and you've been seeing their name in all the magazines, and you kind of like what they did. So it gives you a leg up when you do move to the world of novels, and that's a good way to start.